November 27, 1950, North Korea. The temperature is dropping to 30 degrees below zero. Captain William Barber leads 234 Marines of Fox Company up 7 miles of frozen terrain to a rocky promontory overlooking Toktong Pass, a narrow mountain pass that will either save or doom 8,000 Marines trapped to the north. The Marines have no way of knowing that the ground they occupy is surrounded by 10,000 Chinese soldiers. As the sun sets on Fox Hill and darkness swallows the frozen landscape, Barber's men dig foxholes into ground so frozen it barely yields to their entrenching tools. They are ordered to hold this position, to keep the road open, to secure the only escape route for thousands of their fellow Marines fighting for their lives at Yudam-ni, 14 miles to the north. Military analysts would later call it suicide. The odds were impossible. The position was indefensible. The weather alone could kill them. But Fox Company didn't know about impossible odds. Over the next 5 days and nights, these 234 Marines would wage one of the most desperate defensive battles in American military history. 3/4 of Fox Company's Marines would be killed, wounded, or captured. But they would not break. They would not retreat. And they would kill over 1,000 Chinese soldiers who tried to take Fox Hill. This is the story of the last stand of Fox Company, when ordinary Marines became legends in the frozen hell of the Chosin Reservoir. To understand Fox Company's stand, you need to understand how 30,000 United Nations troops ended up surrounded by 120,000 Chinese soldiers in the mountains of North Korea in November 1950. The Korean War had started brilliantly for the United States. After the North Korean invasion of South Korea in June 1950, General Douglas MacArthur executed one of the most audacious amphibious assaults in military history, the landing at Incheon. UN forces drove the North Koreans back across the 38th parallel and pushed deep into North Korea. MacArthur promised his troops would be home for Christmas. He believed the war was essentially over. All that remained was mopping up scattered North Korean units. But MacArthur ignored Mao's warnings about pushing UN forces deep into North Korea. The Chinese leader had made it clear, if American forces approached the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China, China would intervene. MacArthur didn't believe him, or didn't care. He ordered forces to advance to the Yalu. The Chinese weren't bluffing. In October 1950, large formations of Chinese troops, dubbed the People's Volunteer Army, secretly crossed the border into North Korea. They moved at night, avoided detection, and assembled in the mountains around the Chosin Reservoir. By mid-November, approximately 120,000 Chinese soldiers were positioned in the mountains. UN intelligence had no idea they were there. The 1st Marine Division, about 15,000 men, was strung out along 78 miles of a single road that snaked through the mountains from the port of Hungnam in the south to Yudam-ni in the north. The road was their lifeline, their only supply route, their only escape route if things went bad. And things were about to go very, very bad. On the morning of November 27, 218 Marines and corpsmen of Fox Company moved out for a 7-mile journey in bitterly cold temperatures of at least 10 degrees below zero. Most walked, carrying 60-pound packs. Some caught rides on trucks. They were disappointed because they would rather be marching with their fellow Marines to where the expected action would be in Yudam-ni, rather than guarding a road. Fox Company was being sent to occupy a hill overlooking Toktong Pass, a boring, cold, miserable assignment that nobody wanted. They arrived at Fox Hill as the sun started to set over the mountain terrain. Captain William Barber studied the position. It was good defensive terrain, a rocky hill that dominated the narrow pass below. But it was also exposed, isolated, and 7 miles from the nearest friendly unit. Temperatures quickly plummeted to 25 below zero. Because of the conditions, Captain Barber hesitated on whether or not to order his men to dig foxholes. He did not think they would see any action that night, but decided to give the order anyway. It was the decision that would save them. The ground was frozen solid. Digging was agony. Hacking at permafrost with entrenching tools. Marines cursed the cold, cursed the assignment, cursed having to dig when they were exhausted from the march. But they dug. And as darkness fell completely over Fox Hill, Barber established his defensive perimeter. Machine guns positioned to cover the approaches. Riflemen in foxholes. Mortars ready to fire. What Barber didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the Chinese 59th Division had been ordered to take Fox Hill that night, to cut the road, to trap the 8,000 Marines at Yudam-ni. The battle for Tok Tong Pass was about to begin. At 2 in the morning, they are awakened by the sound, bugles, whistles, cymbals, and drum beats of a massive assault by thousands of enemy infantry. The Chinese attacked in human waves. Hundreds of soldiers surging up the slopes of Fox Hill, shouting, blowing bugles, creating chaos and terror in the darkness. They knew the Marines were there. They knew the position had to be taken, and they were willing to pay any price. The firefight was immediate and brutal. Marines firing into masses of Chinese infantry advancing through the snow. Machine guns cutting down attackers. Grenades exploding. Mortars dropping shells on the slopes. Private Hector Cafferata and Private First Class Ken Benson were in a foxhole together when a satchel charge landed right on top of them. Benson grabbed it before it could explode and threw it back out of the hole. Cafferata fought the enemy without either his coat or his boots, neither of which he could locate in the early morning darkness. The temperature was 30 below zero. He was fighting in his socks and a light jacket. For the rest of the night, I was batting hand grenades away with my entrenching tool while firing my rifle at them. I must have whacked a dozen grenades that night with my tool, Cafferata later remembered. After scurrying to a trench with a few other Marines, Benson reached for another enemy grenade to protect his fellow Marines when it exploded and temporarily blinded him. With shrapnel lodged in his face, Benson blindly loaded ammunition into empty rifles and kept handing them to the others. Captain Barber was everywhere that night, moving between positions, encouraging his men, directing fire. And then, in the early morning darkness, he was hit. Although severely wounded in the leg in the early morning of the 29th, Captain Barber continued to maintain personal control, often moving up and down the lines on a stretcher to direct the defense. He refused evacuation, refused to leave his men. For the next 5 days, he would command Fox Company from a stretcher, being carried to wherever the fighting was hottest. By dawn, the first Chinese assault had been repulsed. Bodies littered the slopes. Fox Company had held, but they'd paid a price. Dead and wounded Marines scattered across Fox Hill. And everyone knew the Chinese would attack again. The attack is just the first wave of 4 days and 5 nights of nearly continuous Chinese attempts to take Fox Hill. Each night the Chinese attacked, sometimes in full regimental strength, sometimes in smaller probing attacks, always with the same objective: take Fox Hill, cut the road, trap the Marines at Yudam-ni. The days brought a different kind of horror. Arctic cold that froze weapons, froze wounds, froze men where they stood. Medical supplies freezing solid. Blood plasma useless. Morphine too frozen to inject into wounded men screaming in pain. Marines who died couldn't be buried. The ground was too frozen. So bodies were stacked like cordwood, frozen solid within minutes. The living envied them sometimes. At least the dead were beyond pain.
Food was scarce, water was scarce, ammunition was carefully rationed. Every bullet mattered, every grenade was precious. But Fox Company had advantages the Chinese didn't. Aided by artillery from Hagaruri and Marine Corsair fighters, Fox Company managed to hold out for 5 days while enduring constant attacks. During the day, when the weather permitted, Marine Corsairs would roar over Fox Hill and drop napalm on Chinese positions. Artillery shells would scream in from Hagaruri 7 miles to the south. The Marines weren't alone. As long as they could hold on, support would come. But at night, they were alone. In the darkness, with Chinese bugles, it was a desperate gamble. The terrain was brutal. Chinese forces were everywhere. Moving at night in sub-zero temperatures through mountains swarming with enemy troops was nearly suicidal. But Davis led them anyway. His ridge runners navigated by compass through the frozen mountains, fighting off Chinese attacks, pushing forward when exhaustion and cold made every step agony. On December 2nd, Davis's force reached Fox Hill. The Marines of Fox Company, those who could still fight, cheered. After 5 days and nights of continuous combat, they were no longer alone. Together, Davis's relief force and the survivors of Fox Company held Fox Hill. On December 3rd, the depleted companies of Marines at Yudam-ni had fought their way back to Fox Hill and helped Fox Company open up the Toktong Pass. The road was open. The Marines at Yudam-ni could escape. Fox Company had accomplished its mission. About 1,000 wounded Marines were carried back to Hagaru on trucks, while about 800 wounded fought the pain and cold as they walked back. The column of Marines retreating from Yudam-ni stretched for miles, a frozen, bloody procession of men who had fought their way out of hell. As dusk settled over the land, the bloody, ragged, unshaven, and unwashed Marines in tattered clothing marched into the base at Hagaru. One lieutenant colonel shouted to the men, "You people will now shape up and look sharp. We're going in like United States Marines." Everyone in the base stopped what they were doing and silently watched the proud men marching in perfect unison, singing the Marines' hymn. They weren't retreating. They were attacking in a different direction. Major General Smith famously said, "Retreat, hell, we're just advancing in a different direction." When the company was relieved, only 82 of his original 220 men were able to walk away from the position so valiantly defended against insuperable odds. 82 men, out of 220 who had climbed Fox Hill 5 days earlier. The rest were dead, wounded, or crippled by frostbite. But they had held. Against impossible odds, they held. Captain William Barber was evacuated by air from Hagaruri on December 8th. He was hospitalized at United States Fleet Activities, Yokosuka, Japan, until his return to the United States in March 1951. He would be awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman in August 1952. Private First Class Cafferata received the Medal of Honor from President Harry S. Truman during ceremonies at the White House on November 24, 1952. His citation stated that he had saved the lives of several fellow Marines through his extraordinary courage. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis also received the Medal of Honor for leading the relief mission that saved Fox Company. 3 Medals of Honor from one battle. One position, one frozen hill in North Korea. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir became legendary in Marine Corps history. Of the 30,000 UN troops who fought there, they would forever be known as the Chosen Few. They had been surrounded by 120,000 Chinese troops in the worst winter conditions imaginable, and they had fought their way out. The cost was staggering. Thousands of casualties, hundreds dead from combat, hundreds more from cold injuries, frostbite so severe that limbs had to be amputated. But they had held. Against impossible odds, they held. Captain William Barber was evacuated by air from Hagaruri on December 8th. He was hospitalized at United States Fleet Activities Yokosuka, Japan, until his return to the United States in March 1951. He would be awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman in August 1952. Private First Class Cafferata received the Medal of Honor from President Harry S. Truman during ceremonies at the White House on November 24, 1952. His citation stated that he had saved the lives of several fellow Marines through his extraordinary courage. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis also received the Medal of Honor for leading the relief mission that saved Fox Company. 3 Medals of Honor from 1 battle, 1 position, 1 frozen hill,